Hello, gamers. It's time to get serious. It's time to fight a ridiculous number of remnants for no reason other than because we can. But how? How is it possible? Are we going to use some kind of complex big brain strategy? No, of course not. Strategy actually isn't that complicated when you're trying to take on a bunch of remnants. In fact, the more complicated you make your strategy, the more points of failure there are. This is probably why, if you look at most optimized fleets people come up with, they're usually pretty simple, and this is not an exception, even though it's not super optimized. It's good enough to take on 500% bonus XP. So let's start with a broad overview. Generally speaking, ships roughly fall into three categories, and you'll probably hear people use these terms. There's fleet anchors, is one term that people will use, but I don't see people usually explaining what that means. Really what it means is it's something that's big and slow and brings the most brute force to your fleet. Usually that's going to be battleships in the late game, but earlier on, something like a Venture could be a fleet anchor. Right? If you're mostly fighting with frigates and destroyers, a Venture might be a half-civilian ship, but it's still got a ridiculous amount of armor and a ridiculous amount of missiles for its cost. And it's slow. So relative to the other ships that you're playing with, it's the fleet anchor, even though in the late game it would never fill that role. It's contextual, and in the context of the late game, paragons are the fleet anchor. And what a fleet anchor means is it's not only the brute force thing, but it's got a couple weaknesses. Number one, it's too slow to disengage from a losing battle. Once it makes contact with the enemy, it's pretty much forced to commit. Well, assuming the enemy wants to commit to the battle. If the enemy just decides to give up, then you can just count yourself lucky. But if the enemy decides they want to commit, fleet anchors can't really disengage. They don't have the tools for that. And number two, they're vulnerable to being surrounded. Yes, even the Paragon. I know the Paragon handles it better with its 360 shields and its weapon arcs being a lot wider than most battleships, but it still doesn't handle it well. It would really rather not have to turn its guns all the way around to shoot at something behind it. Now, that is the fleet anchor, which is usually going to take up the most deployment points in your fleet. In this case, it's 75% is on these three Paragons. Now, how do you compensate for those weaknesses? Well, frigates are a good answer. I would call these like swarm type, if they have a type. But fleet anchor, swarm type, frigate. You might say like most frigates are swarm type, but it also extends to some destroyers. Like the Medusa can also fill this role. It's got enough top speed plus phase skimmer, so it's kind of like a big frigate, really. But I digress. The point of these is partly to capture the points, but it's also partly to protect your battleships or your fleet anchors from being surrounded. It only takes a few, and the cost effectiveness ratio here is really high. It only takes a couple of frigates, or in this case I'm using 5, partly to fight, so I can have one escorting each Paragon, and then 2 of them to fight over the capture points. That's only a total of 30 deployment points invested in these frigates, and the difference it makes in the battle is massive. I would much rather have 5 omens than a 4th Paragon. Because while another Paragon will be good, they're still going to have the issue of enemy frigates getting in behind them. Having omens makes that issue a lot less prevalent. And so the cost effectiveness ratio there is very high. Now, the downside to frigates, of course, is that they, ignoring deployment points, they use up a lot of officers, where 3 Paragons can use only 3 officers for 75% of the fleet. Then 5 omens are only using a fraction of the deployment points, but they're using more officers. That's really the downside to them. But of course, if you've got Paragons already, then they're already with an officer limit of 8. That's not really an issue if you've got Paragons. This is kind of the way that it works: is you have some large ships using up a few of your officers, and the reason that you don't want to spam too many swarm ships is because you would run out of officers, and officers make a big difference. that doesn't run it. Like when you have a mix of them, not only do they synergize well together, but it means that you also get to use the maximum number of officers without like while also covering all of your ships, and you don't have to run unofficered ships. And then there is the flagship. In this case, something very simple, something very straightforward, something a lot of people are familiar with, an Aurora with safety overrides. Now this falls into a different category. This is what usually people will call this punch down. They'll say, oh, this ship is designed to punch down. What does that mean? It means it's got enough speed to outrun anything that's bigger than it, so you don't have to take a losing battle. Right? If I see a Nova or a Radiant, I don't have to fight it. I can avoid it. But if I see something smaller than my ship, I have enough damage output to kill it before it gets away. Like a Paragon is going to have issues killing enemy frigates if the enemy frigates choose to run away. Now, of course, remnants are usually not going to do that. They're fearless after all. But if they weren't fearless, and let's say that they decided to avoid the Paragon, how is it going to kill their frigates? It's not. Part of what a punch-down ship does is it's got enough damage and enough speed that it can catch faster ships by surprise and then just destroy them in a quick burst before they get a chance to react, while avoiding larger ships. And that's kind of the three basic ship categories. You've got the fleet anchor, you've got the punch-down ship, and you've got the swarm ship. It's almost like rock, paper, scissors, where fleet anchor beats the punch-down ship, the punch-down ship beats the smaller ships, the swarm, and then the swarm ships can beat the fleet anchor, unless the enemy also brings their own swarm ships to prevent you from surrounding them. It gets a little, obviously real battles are a little messier than any kind of like system of categorization like that, but that's broadly speaking the role that they fill. And generally punch-down ships work better under player control, or at the very least, with player commands. Because you can make them work very well if you give a lot of active commands. But either way, you're either piloting it yourself, or you're giving them a lot of orders to make them do their job properly. So it requires a lot more player attention usually. Whereas fleet anchors and swarm ships don't usually require too much player input. They'll work like 80% of the effectiveness with minimal input from the player. Which is why they tend to be favored. Right? If you see a lot of people will, if they're making like an optimized fleet, a lot of the time they'll do battleship spam or frigate spam. They're probably not going to do punch down ship spam because it just requires a little more attention, and which means that if you miss something, there's a lot more room for things to go wrong. But that's enough for the overview. Let's get into the specifics of each ship design. And there's only 3 of them, so we're going to go into detail. The Paragon. What have we got here? Well, the first thing you want to do is maximize its DPS, because we've got a lot of ships to kill. We need to kill them as fast as possible, or we're going to start running out of peak performance on everything else. So maximum DPS, and the way to maximize DPS is you maximize your flux dissipation. 55 vents, flux distributor, ordnance expertise. I've even gone for elite energy weapon mastery to reduce the flux cost on energy weapons. And honestly, the first part is even pretty good. Now, a lot of people will say that you don't want energy weapon mastery on paragons because they have such long range that the first part doesn't really do anything. But that's not entirely true. Because remnants, again, being fearless, they are going to close the distance with you. It doesn't matter that the Paragon is slow and has extremely long range. The remnants are going to close the range anyways, so a lot of the time you're actually getting the full damage value out of this. Surprisingly enough. So don't underestimate how good that first part is against remnants specifically. They're going to close the distance with you. You don't need to worry about it. And then the second part is just generically good. Reduced flux cost means you can fire your guns more. The other stuff should be relatively obvious. Target analysis. I really want the elite bonus, but the other ones are more a higher priority. Like combat, we've got combat endurance, of course. It's just 5% more damage dealt, 5% reduced damage taken, 5% more top speed. compared to your other options on a paragon, this is probably the best. And then, of course, elite helmsmanship, the flat plus 10 top speed. I would say that on capital ships, it's pretty much mandatory to get 2 bonuses to maneuverability. And obviously it's not mandatory, but I think in general, if you're having trouble with these ships, get helmsmanship and auxiliary thrusters, or if it's a low-tech ship, you would get, instead of auxiliary thrusters, you could get elite impact mitigation. But either way, you want 2 of these 50% bonuses so that it can actually turn and face its targets in a reasonable amount of time. And then the elite bonus is really good because flat 10 top speed. It's pretty self-explanatory. We're up to, like, this has a baseline speed of 30. Now it's up to 48, and this doesn't account for coordinated maneuvers. This is another one of the reasons why frigates are really good. Putting an officer into your frigates with coordinated maneuvers, that's 6% top speed for the entire fleet, up to 20%. So with the 5 of them, we're pretty much always maxed out on our nav rating, which means that the entire fleet just gets a 20% top speed boost. It's really hard to understate how valuable that is. That, like, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it makes such a big difference. It's part of why the remnants are often so difficult, is because they have coordinated maneuvers. In fact, it might be, they used to have electronic warfare, but that got removed, so it might be the only skill that they have now. They have, in fact, I don't think other factions even get it. I think it might, I should have looked that up. I don't remember if Tritachyon gets it, but I know it's the skill that the remnants get, and it's part of what makes them so dangerous, is because they flood the battlefield with frigates full of gamma cores, and that means that all of their ships have a permanent 20% top speed bonus, so it makes their hit-and-run tactics so viable. So having your own coordinated maneuvers, effectively canceling out their bonus by having your own bonus, makes a big difference. And for you, here, Paragon, 20% is another 6 to top speed. So this thing goes from a baseline speed of 30 by default up to 54. It's almost doubled. In fact, it's almost as fast as a cruiser at this point. Maximum speed, maximum DPS. That's what we need for the Paragon. Now we follow that up with the elite bonus to field modulation, which normally I've talked about how I don't think it's as good as people usually make it out to be, but in a high-tech fleet like this, and especially when you've got fortress shields, yeah, it's really good. Like, it synergizes super well with fortress shields. It's kind of a default take, but unfortunately, that means that I can't get target analysis elite, even though it is also really good. But anyways, another nice thing is elite helmsmanship makes it easier to get the zero flux boost. So, as a little experiment, I've S-modded auxiliary thrusters to increase the zero flux boost. So those two kind of synergize nicely. Elite helmsmanship, S-modded auxiliary thrusters. Nice little synergy there. I would recommend trying it. Normally I would S-mod flux distributor to get a little more dissipation, or I would S-mod stabilized shields for that S-mod bonus. But I think auxiliary thrusters also works pretty well. It helps it doesn't just help it's a little bit less effective in direct combat, but it does mean that the Paragon can get around the battlefield faster to get where it needs to be, which can potentially be very useful. I mean, these hull mods should be very familiar to anyone who's used a Paragon. Solar shielding, even after the reduction from 20% to down to 10%, it's still pretty good against remnants who mostly use energy weapons. We've got accelerated shields, because whether or not you use frontal shield conversion, which, you know, some people do, I don't really recommend that. I would stick to the Omni shield with the Paragon. But regardless, you're going to want accelerated shields. The Paragon pretty much always needs this. Resistant flux conduits is just very good on capital ships in general. Right, the last thing you want is your battleship getting disabled by a little bit of EMP damage, especially when the remnants use a lot of it with elite target analysis. And then the extra venting speed. On a ship with this much dissipation, it can go from being at 80% flux, which is thousands and thousands of points of damage absorption, down to 0 in like 6 seconds. It's very impressive. And yeah, hardened shields, stabilized shields, that's all pretty obvious. So for the Paragon, I think that the current best setup, setting aside Omega weapons, is S-modded magazines with auto pulse lasers and auto lances. Plasma cannons are good, and of course there's the meme option of going 4 tachyon lances, but that's not a real build. That's a fun build, but it's not a real build. Okay, if you want to kill the remnants, and you want it to do that under AI control, you need a hard flux option up here, and not high scatter amplifier. Just don't. Just don't use high scatter amplifier. Right, there's some builds that can use high scatter amplifier, but they're not on capital ships, I can tell you that. In this case, I think S-modded magazines with auto pulse laser is going to give you, because this needs to mostly do shield damage, right? We've got tachyon lances to strip off armor. We've got auto lances to deal with hull. Mostly we need it for the shield damage. And auto pulse laser with S-modded magazines is going to do that better than plasma cannons. Couple that with, of course, heavy needlers. I've tried other weapons. I think heavy needlers, I think for the most part, I've tried a bunch of different things with the Paragon, and I don't want to say I've solved the build, but this it converges on this build a lot, which is the turret gyros, of course. Like, does that require much of an explanation? But like this layout, auto pulse lasers, auto lances with magazines, and then tachyon lances in these turret slots, and heavy needlers. Like these, actually, maybe I'll just strip off these so I can... This weapon setup is where it converges a lot. This seems to be going to give you the best DPS, the best bang for your buck. And then, might as well throw in some Reapers because they're cheap, and burst lasers, because we've already got 25% increased damage to missiles and fighters from this, and then they also benefit from expanded magazines. Might as well throw on some burst lasers. They can shoot down sabos. That's valuable. And, you know, people say that high-tech doesn't need point defense, and that's sometimes true. But having your burst lasers shoot down sabos is undeniably very useful. So you could experiment around with this build a bit more on the Paragon, but so far this seems like this is pretty close to what an optimized build is going to look like. And I've probably spent... Well, I feel like I'm spending too much time on this, but at the same time, there's only 3 ships in the fleet, so... Is it really too much? Of course not. Now, the Omen. There's probably some room... Yeah, there's definitely some room to experiment with different missiles. I just went with Missile Autoloader and a Reaper, because it is really funny watching them sneak up beside a Nova and then blast it with a Reaper. Like, the Nova will try and pounce on one of your Paragons, which is not going to work, obviously, and then an Omen just sneaks up beside it and takes out most of its health with a single Reaper. It's very entertaining. Is it the best? Maybe. It might be better to instead S-mod harden shields, drop the autoloader, and get more vents, because this thing... I mean, the flux dissipation doesn't look like it's an issue, but once you factor in the EMP emitter, it actually does generate a fair amount of soft flux. So getting more dissipation might be the right way to go. Regardless, when it comes to frigates, you need a solid weapon package, and you need max capacitors. And you can usually get away, I mean, depending on the situation, you might be able to get away with less than maximum, but this is usually where I think people don't quite get the value that they should be getting out of their frigates. This right here. You want S-modded flux coil adjunct and max capacitors and hardened shields on pretty much any frigate with shields. Like even the Lasher. Sure, it's low tech. It's still a frigate. You still want max capacity, you still want hardened shields, because that capacity is its entire lifeline. As soon as that's gone, as soon as the enemies fill up your flux bar, you're kind of screwed. So maxing it out is very important. Now, luckily, the Omen doesn't need to do too much to have an effective weapons package. The main thing it needs is systems expertise. Other frigates, like Tempest or Lasher or Scarab, you actually have to think about what you're going to put on it. But the Omen, most of its damage is coming from the EMP emitter anyways, so it doesn't require too much thought. You can put other weapons here, but generally speaking, because the EMP emitter shuts off other weapons while it's active, you want something that's got high burst damage and a long cooldown. So the antimatter blaster. And of course, automated repair unit. This is because the last thing you need is your omen dying because its engines got tickled by an ion beam. You can try to increase their EMP resistance. I don't find that it works very well. You're going to need like insulated engines and resistant flux conduits, and that might even not be enough. On top of that, you might also want impact mitigation, and at that point, it's just a massive investment. When instead, you could SMOD a repair unit, and the engines repair in like less than 2.5 seconds. You don't need to resist EMP damage if you just repair it immediately. So that's essential for keeping it alive against EMP weaponry. Well, shield-piercing weaponry, specifically. Because even with hardened shields, all it takes is for one ion beam to arc through and hit the engines, and it's going to flame out. For the skills, point defense, because the EMP emitter hits enemy missiles and fighters. Elite target analysis. The elite bonus, plus 100% weapon and damage to weapons and engines. Talked about this before. That applies to EMP damage. So effectively, it doubles the effectiveness of the EMP emitter at disabling enemy ships. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Helmsmanship, because it's got a very high top speed, so 15%, not only is that good, but the 50% increased maneuverability means 50% increased acceleration and deceleration, which is very important. I used to neglect this with my frigates, because I thought it wouldn't make a big difference, but I know better now. It definitely makes a difference. You don't need as much maneuverability as you would want for a capital ship, but you do want some. Like, if you don't have helmsmanship, then auxiliary thrusters would be a good pick. And, of course, elite field modulation. Because what else are you going to grab? I guess you could grab elite gunnery implants, but it's not super necessary. I've already got the ECM package on all the omens, and I've already got electronic warfare as one of my skills. So, as long as you get over 10%, you don't need to stack it up. Like, sure, I could do that with the omens and get another 20%, and that would be fine. Like, it would help me, like, it would help you a little bit. But overall, I would rather focus on the survivability with field modulation. And then we've got the flagship. Classic safety override Aurora. Heavy blasters and ion cannons and a bunch of missiles. Just the way Ludd intended. You know, minus the everything except the missiles. You would probably hate this thing, actually. Well, I mean, it's got safety override. That's a Pather thing. It's complicated. Look, Pather relationships with technology are complicated. Now, the Typhoon might seem like a weird choice, but I've tested this with both double Sabo and with... Like, I've swapped it out for a Sabo. I've tested that. It is actually worse at killing remnants than with the Typhoon. And you'll see why in a minute. But for now, you're going to have to trust me. This is better than having another Sabo. And for player skills, impact mitigation might seem like a weird choice over field modulation. But we run into the same issue that the omens have, which is that an ion beam tickling your engines and instantly shutting them off is a huge problem. At that point, you are just dead. It is over. Good night. But unlike omens, you don't need to stack up a ton of bonuses because a cruiser's engines have more like inherent durability than a frigate's engines. And for that reason, you don't need to stack up like 2 or 3 bonuses. You only need 1 bonus to engine durability. You only need 1. So instead of S-modding repair unit, I've opted to get impact mitigation. Plus, the extra maneuverability from the elite bonus is also really good. So as much as I would want field modulation, unfortunately I can't have it. Now, normally, I normally wouldn't do that. The problem is expanded missile racks. See, for most fights, you are not going to need expanded missile racks. This is specifically because I'm trying to fight an insane number of remnants, and I need the extra missiles. But outside of an insane situation like this, you don't actually need expanded missile racks. So you could drop this and pick up insulated engines. And then if you have insulated engines, you can drop impact mitigation for field modulation. You could do that. But in this case, I need the extra missiles, so unfortunately, I have to switch over to this one. Let's see. Electronic warfare is just generally really good. It makes, even if you've got frigates that can win at the capture points, it's just a huge... It just makes life a lot easier when you can capture them. So capture the points so much easier. Plus, the extra ECM doesn't hurt. I mean, most of the fleet skills here should be pretty self-explanatory. Officer training, cybernetic augmentation. More stats is more good. Simple as that. Okay, well, hopefully all of that made sense, because I'm about to demonstrate what it looks like. And hopefully this isn't just like a case... Now, you could copy this fleet, right? It's actually not a bad idea, because you can use the omens for the early game. They're going to be good in the early game, and you can immediately start putting S-mods on them because, well, they're going to stick around for the whole game. Then in the mid-game, pick up an Aurora as your flagship, and these 6 ships will carry you through most of the mid-game. And then it's only really when you get to the late game, then you start piling on the paragons at the tail end. That's a good strategy. But you don't necessarily have to copy this fleet. Hopefully, the lessons about the relationship between fleet anchors and frigates and swarming ships will be applicable to other ships. Like, you would use an onslaught, at least an AI-controlled onslaught, similarly to how you would use a paragon. Or you could use scarabs, or you could use... Honestly, even lashers could work. I've made them work. But that's enough preamble. Let's get into the actual meat. 500%. Okay. So we can deploy all. First thing we're going to want to do is capture some of these points. You can go there. You can go there. You escort that. You escort that. And we ride. That gives us the nav buoy. Now we just gotta wait for those last 2. Now the nav buoy is kind of useless because both us and the enemy... Yeah, see, look, electronic warfare letting us capture those instantly is really nice because it means we get the paragon out earlier. And you can come back and escort that. So the nav buoy is kind of useless because both sides have coordinated maneuvers, so we both have maxed out nav rating all the time. Comm relay is also kind of useless because I've already got a again, coordinated maneuvers mean we have a massive bonus to command point recovery. So adding another 25% makes very little difference. Sensor jammer does have a little, actually has a little bit of an impact. If we control both sensor jammers, it'll give us it'll penalize their range a little more, and it'll reduce our penalty by like a couple percentage points. So it's not nothing, even though it is pretty small. But regardless, the important thing about the capture points is that the enemy is going to fight over them. So we can take advantage of that. You stay here, and you stay here. Right? And then we can have you guys move up the middle. Maybe a little bit further back. And then we've got to rely on our flagship to do a little bit of the work here. All right. And it looks like the enemy's coming straight down the middle. Neat. You want to kill these things as fast as possible. This is part of why DPS is important, is because... Wow, that is interesting. It used plasma burn into the paragon, flamed out, and then the omen still managed to hit it with a Reaper and overload it. That is some incredible timing. Well, anyways. Because if you're... Like, the paragon can beat a Radiant in a 1v1, but if it's being swarmed by destroyers, it's going to lose. So having enough DPS and potentially some player interference, to remove a lot of these destroyers is essential in actually taking out the enemy battleship. Otherwise, you're going to be the one losing your battleships, and that is no good. And of course, we can also distract the enemy. I'm going to be very, very delicate with it, though. To be very delicate. The last thing we need is to be dead ourselves. It is far too early for that. Now, I can be a little bit riskier because he doesn't have any ion beams and he doesn't have any tachyon lances. But if he has either of those weapons, their shield-piercing properties, you have to be a lot more careful. Okay, you guys can switch. It's fine. You can move forward because the enemies aren't... Yeah, we'll just move both of you forward. And you can actually just go on the kill. I haven't even used my missiles yet. Alright. It is worth hunting these things down as a player. Even though the Aurora might seem like a bit of overkill, you can see that's why the Typhoon is so valuable. You overload them with sabos, or at least if you time it correctly, the AI will see the Reaper incoming, and then it'll overload when the sabos pop, and then the Reaper will hit it anyways. If you just have sabos, that takes a lot longer. And being able to kill those guys as fast as possible, as I said earlier, is very important. Okay, maybe let's chill a little bit. How much armor damage you taken? Not too much. Mostly doing damage to them, which is good. Yeah, don't think I want to go too far on that one. I have to back up a little bit. Right, and that's the punch down strategy right there. Yes, their frigates are fast. Yes, they're annoying. Yes, they're going to try and surround you. And that's why you bring something that can actually just kill them immediately, get them off the field. They're a huge pain in the ass. Yeah, I'm going to back up from that. I don't want to chase it too far. Oh, you are so dead. Nice. Okay, we can move you up as well. A lot of them are spilling over to the left side, so let's try and clear that out a bit. Ooh, didn't quite get it right. He's also got a lot of sabos of his own, so I'm going to try and take some distance and let that dissipate. Get over here. I'm trying to kill you. Oh, I missed. Really? That's unfortunate. Well, I still killed him, but damn. You are in an awkward position. Yeah, see, this point, we've killed off the battleship, which is great, but now the enemy is flooding... Now that they've got 60 deployment points cleared up, the enemy is just flooding the battlefield with lots of smaller ships. And this is where you're going to really feel the big difference that frigates make, especially, you know, assuming that they're built well enough to actually beat the enemy. Wow. As I was saying, especially if they're built well enough to beat the enemy, getting your Paragons surrounded by all of this is very not good for their health. You want to keep them in front where they don't have to do too much turning to get their main guns on target. Punch down, baby. Punch down. Yeah, they're trying to surround us. As you can see. They're going for it. I might actually be able to take this capture point for myself. The omen's not going to do it. Hopefully we can get through this fight without any losses. Demonstrate the true power of doing your job properly. Yeah, you are way out there, and you're surrounded by a lot of frigates. That's probably not good. I don't like that. That thing's got double phase lances. Let's move you a bit. Yeah, both of you seem to be potentially in trouble. Okay, so I did succeed. Yeah, let's get you back over there. And let's reorder you to come back here. Perfect. You can see that the paragons, they're just killing. That's all they're doing. They're just killing. And that's what you want your fleet anchors to do. You want them to just sit somewhere inconvenient for the enemy and just kill them. Although it does look like a lot of them are slipping around to the other side. They should be fine. They've got omens to cover their rear end. I actually want you to stay there. And yeah, thanks to electronic warfare, they've actually managed to capture the sensor jammer. That's kind of funny. So, yeah, I'm going to kill you guys because you've been chasing my omen for a little too long. I'd like it to come home. Omen, please come home. Yeah, it looks like there's a bug. So there is a bug where sometimes your frigates will consider an enemy way too threatening, and they'll just never approach it. And I think that's what was happening with that lumen, because it's willing to approach that, but it never approached that lumen. Which is kind of annoying. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave you to handle these. I need to get over there. Or I guess they're all going to follow me. That's annoying. Yeah, alright, go away. I'm going to start preserving my sabos by firing annihilators instead. But yeah, I think we need a little bit of help over here. You are doing just fine, okay. Yeah, it seems like there was a bug with that lumen being scaring it off, but now that it's dead, it's not having any issues. Yeah, you wasted all your charges, you fool. Now you are dead. Okay. So that takes care of a lot of the enemies surrounding. Let's see, so your armor's good, your armor's good. You've taken a bit of damage. But hull is still intact. And we do have to be careful when the enemy spawns in more Radiants. Nova's not too scary. Radiants, they can still pose issues. Now, you might think that safety overrides is necessary for the Aurora to win in battle. But if you're piloting it yourself, I actually think that instead of going with safety overrides, going with a targeting unit is roughly about as effective. The reason that you favor safety overrides in general is not for its direct combat capabilities. It's so that you can get around the battlefield faster. Because if I chase something down over here and I kill it, I'm gonna have to fly all the way over here to get back into the battle. And having safety overrides makes that faster. That's kind of the main advantage that it has. In direct combat, now, it's a bit different for AI usage, but for player usage, it's about as powerful either way. Just some of my thoughts on that. Alright, well, I'm not going to fight two of you, and I'm not going to fight that. Nope. No, thank you. Yeah, you see, not that scary. Unfortunately, I am very out of sabos, which makes fighting enemy cruisers a lot more difficult. But you gotta do what you gotta do. Oh, and while this is mostly vanilla, there is one... Well, there's a couple significant changes. One is I've applied the Paladin buff to this battle. And another is I've actually given Sparks integrated point defense AI. Since I'm not using either of those things, that just means that the remnants are slightly harder than usual. Not a lot, but a little bit. Damn, this debris is in the way! I'm trying to kill this thing before the... Damn it. Before that. Now I have to deal with this. If not for that debris, this would not be an issue. What a shame. Okay, let's get out of here. I don't think I took any hull damage, so I guess that was not too bad. I don't really need you guys fighting over these anymore. Nope, kill that. And you... Did I lose an omen? Yes. I lost one. Okay. Oh, that's right behind me. Okay. I didn't even notice that. Oops. Yeah, the omen is bugging out again. You can see it's not approaching. It is refusing to approach this glimmer. You see it's sitting way back there. Now, you can help by doubling up on the escort. I don't know what you're doing. Hello? Are you also bugged out? What are you doing? The enemy's right in front of you. Hello? Are you sleeping? What's going on here? Can you... Yup, it's bugged out. Like, it should be attacking, but it's just doing straight up nothing. Oh, I overloaded first, of course. Please help me. Thank you. You could have done that like 10 minutes ago. Damn. That was a lot of damage that I did not need to take. And it looks like this paragon has actually taken some hull damage. But we're getting towards the end, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Yeah, I really need you guys to stick together so we don't get screwed over. And I can get one of you to come help. You can actually go after that. You can go after that. I have to be very careful now with the orders, though. But yeah, I need you. You're facing absolutely the wrong way. Yeah, this guy's got sabos, and I don't. If one of you would help, like I ordered you to, that would be fantastic. if one of you would help like I ordered you to, that would be... Okay, I guess they're just not going to. Cool. Alright, so the Nova's down. Let's get you to attack that. Let's get you to attack that. We can actually cancel these now. We're not getting surrounded anymore. And I'm going to have you two go after this. Seriously, do you guys... Are you trying to get me killed? Come on now. You can see that's going to go pretty well. Oh, okay, apparently I didn't order that correctly because I thought I told you to kill that. Yeah, that thing is just going to run away. This is the one thing that's kind of annoying, is Apexes seem to be, ironically, are one of the ships that will just run away from Paragons and keep them chasing them forever, which is a good strategy, but most of the Remnants don't do it. It's like something with the Apexes they do. I don't know why. I'm not sure what's different about them. There is another Radiant coming in, which is a problem. I'm going to get all four of you to target that. Hopefully we can kill that real quick. That would be great. I'm going to distract this guy. Okay, that's very important. Because now it means we can focus on this guy. I need to back up because my combat readiness is running out. Now I've got malfunctions to worry about. So I'm going to help the four of them attack this. Okay, you need to back up, actually. Because you're directly in the way of your friend. It's like, yes, I know you're winning, but... even then. Yeah, see, two of them aren't... You guys are just not doing anything. I guess you can just leave. Ah, got him. The old Reaper in the shield gap trick. Classic. So you guys can help me with this. And now we can corner that last one. Just gonna throw out the last of my missiles to try and get this done. In fact, I'll turn those to auto-fire. And there we are. And I still have a little bit of missiles left. Even then. Let's get you to back up. I'll have all of you actually retreat at this point, because this is the last enemy. Yeah. Can you move? You're blocking the way. We would kill it faster if you would just not be in the way. There we go. Claim victory. We lost one omen. I don't have room for all that stuff, but I'm taking it. So yeah, hopefully that was instructional. And if not, no, just copy-paste the fleet and call it a day. So yeah, that's about it. See ya.